a beautiful night in the hood. It's a beautiful night in the hood. Gonna be hanging out in the hood.
Hi, welcome to Almost Cooperstown. I'm Mark, and this is Gordon, and we love talking about baseball.
This week was actually a pretty interesting week because we saw what was both a simultaneous example of, I guess, what some would consider somewhat savvy base running, and one of the worst defensive plays of all times in the Cubs game, Pirates game this week with Javi Baez.
And yeah, do you think it was savvy on Baez's part, or did he get away with it? Which is it?
Well, I guess the problem is it's kind of a chicken and the egg problem because it's only a savvy base running move as far as the guy making the boneheaded play makes it a savvy base running move. Like him turning around and running away from first base back to home is only savvy because the guy actually chased him.
So why don't you recount the play a little bit, just sort of, to make sure everybody understands what.
So to give the key details here, I don't remember the particular inning or exactly how many men on base, but I can tell you this. There's a guy on third. There's two outs. Javi Baez is at bat. Javi Baez hits a weak little ground ball to first base. The first baseman picks it up. Do you happen to remember the first baseman's name? I'm blanking on it right now.
Tyler. Well, first of all, I'm pretty sure it was Contreras who was on base. And
Contreras is on base at third.
He's on second, though. He's on second. Two outs. So, and Will Craig, was the first baseman.
So Baez hits a little tapper down the first base line with two outs. Will Craig fields the ball. And then for some inexplicable reason, Baez is running down the first baseline. He kind of stops and sees that Craig is coming towards him. So he starts backing up and running back towards home plate.
Now Craig is off the base. He's not right next to the base at this point. He's come down the line.
Right. But all he has to do is touch first base and the inning is over. There are two outs. But for reasons that will likely never be fully explained, he decides the only course of action he can take is to chase Javi Baez down the first baseline and tag him out. So while this is going on, Wilson Contreras comes around third base coming from second and just starts coming home and scores.
Now Wilson Contreras is a catcher and certainly not known for his blazing speed.
So, that in and of itself is something of a savvy base running move that Wilson Contreras recognized that he could get home in that situation. So good on him, good on the third base coach that sent him, because that is probably actually more intelligent base running than anything else that happened over at first base.
Well, certainly more than Baez's, play, which he just kind of, out of opportunity because the guy was making the wrong play, he just continued down the wrong path because it ended up being the right path. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Oh yeah, exactly. It only became a genius decision after the fact.
Right. When Craig didn't go back to the base, if he's going to chase me back to home plate, I'll run here. And then as he turned around to go back up towards first base, Contreras, and I wonder if Craig was trying to keep his eye on Contreras, maybe coming around third by not going back to the base.
But there's two outs.
I understand that he obviously doesn't.
All he ever had to do was touch first base and the inning's over. So that was it was one of the most inexplicable plays I've ever seen in baseball. And it's the kind of thing that if it used to be around the Sports Center not top 10, that should be up there as number one for an eternity in Eclipse of the Butt Fumble. But it's not as flashy a play as that.
Right. And one of the things about the way baseball is today compared to the years of, I think we've talked about seasoning that players would get formerly by being in the minor leagues for a bunch of years, is there was a better chance, you might think, of those players having experienced things like that and understanding what to do in the situation better than a younger player who might have come up and just obviously made the wrong play. This guy's going to have to live this down his whole career, which is, kind of awful.
It's brutal. You're stuck. This is not going to follow you until you do something else that's of bigger note than this.
And Sony made the point that, Baez, someday when he gets traded, right, and he comes back to the Cubs, that's the play they're going to put up on the scoreboard that defined his Cub career.
Exactly. That's going to be his biggest Cub memory, was somehow that.
But players don't know exactly what it is. It's hard to believe as a fan and watching the game going, how could he not notice to touch first base? It is hard to believe. This is a professional baseball player. You think they would know that, but they don't look at the rules, obviously, and understand the game as well as they should. That seems to be clear.
But it was interesting to me because I was thinking about, that play and what it meant and how both of those guys that were involved in that play, Javi Baez and Wilson Contreras, are not known as the fastest guys around. Certainly not Contreras. But
Right.
base running is kind of interesting because you don't necessarily need to be fast to be a great base runner. There's guys that have gotten lots of steals in a season that we know were terrible base runners.
And when you say lots of steals, you mean 15 or 20 from a guy who is
Oh, no.
fast.
I remember Roger Cedeno.
Yeah, he was fast, though.
He was fast, but he was not a smart base runner.
Nobody stole 66 bases one year.
Right. But that's what's interesting about base running is that you could have a guy that steals 66 bases a year not actually be that great a base runner. And you could have a guy like Keith Hernandez who didn't steal that many bases, who was a very intelligent base runner.
So let's talk about Keith because he's one of my faves, and I went looking for this evidence that I remember Keith Hernandez as being a good base runner, a very good base runner for a guy who didn't have speed. Right, that's the important thing.
And this is something that is hard when you have this discussion because unfortunately you kind of have to discount the early era of baseball because before about 54. There's not a lot of statistics they kept on base running. You had stolen bases and that was basically because they didn't think of it that way. You didn't have this metric driven approach to the game. So you don't have a lot of the little things that would tell you other than which guys were really fast.
So in the case of Keith, he is, I may not be aware, on the docket to be elected into the Cardinal Hall of Fame. And as Met fans, we love his contribution to the Mets, and he's in the booth now and all that. But he played 9 years and won an MVP, a co-MVP with Willie Stargell in '79 with the Cardinals. And so what I saw in his background is he's third all time in base running for the Cardinals in terms of the metrics they use to rate good base runners. And that really surprised me because the Cardinals obviously been around a super long time.
And they've had a couple
Lou Brock and Vince Coleman, take those two guys to start. And those actually are the two guys ahead of him. But Ozzie Smith, Willie McGee, all these other guys who were known as fast players and good base runners, supposedly, Hernandez was higher rated than them. And I thought that was really interesting. That was the only statistic I could come up with because there's nothing in his Met career that came out.
Right. And I think you come up with an interesting question of, do you need to be able to steal bases to be a good base runner?
By metrics now, the answer is no. That's not the metric, the only metric. It certainly is helpful, and then we talk about your success rate, and we can get into all that. But taking the extra base is one of the things that I found is what you rate a really good base runner. So one of the worst base runners of all time, supposedly, and this comes from 2017, was Victor Martinez, right? V-Mart, really professional major league hitter and came up as a catcher and played first base, and everybody knows he wasn't fast, but he only took the extra base 7% of the time.
That's just that, which shows that there were so many bases that guy left that he could have taken.
That same year, Kiermaier of the Rays at that point, took the extra base 77% of the time. Billy Hamilton, who was still playing, believe it or not, Connie LaRussa found a use for him when Robert got hurt. He's playing for the White Sox. 66% took the extra base compared to 7%. 7%. I mean, that means you're basically a statue.
Right. And so I went looking to try and find something that could really quantify, if we're going to talk about some of the best base runners of all time, because while I think you can be a good base runner without necessarily stealing a lot of bases, I feel like it would be difficult to break into the upper echelon of best base runners without being able to steal bases, because all of those guys that they could steal bases and be savvy base runners at the same time, where Keith, he could be a savvy base runner, but as hard as he tried, he could never be a guy that stole 60 plus bases.
No. At a time when people did it, by the way, too, you have to think about eras, and that was the time. And those Cardinal teams that he played on, we've talked about a number of times with McGee, even with Tommy Hurd, those guys all could run. And they did run, Coleman stealing 110 bases. But the thing about it would be when you watch those games at that time about good base running and how you think about baseball, with the threat of the steal being so much more than today. I mean, I guess Whit Merrifield and Mondesi of the Royals are two of the best base stealers out there right now. But anytime those guys got on base, right, if it was McGee or Coleman, and it was like a walking double. So
Yeah.
so the pressure you felt was so different than I think than what you feel right now.
Right, and I think that has a couple things to do with one, catcher pop times. I'm not sure if they're better, but I feel like catchers, certainly their arm strength and ability to get the ball to second base has improved over time. And with pitchers throwing harder and harder and harder on a consistent basis, it's got to be an easier to steal on like an 85 to 90 mile an hour fastball than it is to steal on a 95 to 100 mile an hour fastball. That's just that
That's
extra.
true.
You're going to get to the second, but you get that much little extra time to get to the base compared to what you have to do now. And I mean, it doesn't do anything because look at Syndergaard. Syndergaard throws like 100 miles an hour, and guys steal like him on crazy,
Right?
Because he's so slow to home plate. But what's happened is that people have done the math, and unless you are an elite base stealer, it's probably not worth it for you to go because making an out there is less valuable than getting to second base in a lot of these cases now.
I think that the home run is worth more, right? So if you hit the ball with a fence, you got 2 runs instead of taking the chance on the guy getting thrown out trying to steal second.
Right.
And a guy like Merrifield, who is a really good base runner as well as being a really good base stealer, right? He's both of those things. He, his success rate is really high. So they're encouraging him to run more now. I mean, you should run into where your success rate starts, going down at this point. If you're going to be successful 80% or more of the time, you should be running more.
You should be running fairly consistently because it does put a lot of pressure on the defense and the pitcher if they know that, oh man, I have Whit Merrifield up first this game, and if I walk him, I'm basically putting him on second base.
So, and you're making the good point, I think, of distinguishing between what is a base stealer and a good base runner. When a place like Sportster, went back and started rated the top base stealers in Major League history. This is going back a few years, but everybody on the list that I saw, number 20 was Ichiro. Ichiro actually had 56 stolen bases in the major leagues. So,
but he was not always a guy that I remember stealing a lot of bases.
He wasn't. Barry Bonds was in there. Right. So Barry Bonds also was a 40-40 guy and had 514 stolen bases. I don't know that steroids had anything to do with him stealing any bases, by the way.
No, because I think that was mostly for the Pirates, I'm assuming.
Yeah, it was before he got to the Giants for sure. And in this list, all guys that you would think are stolen, Reyes, Carl Crawford, Ozzie Smith, Maury Wills, stolen bases, Juan Pierre. Listen to these names, right? Otis Nixon, stolen bases, Kenny Lofton, Willie Wilson. So these aren't great base runners necessarily. They're first great base stealers who are probably really good base runners too.
Now, I found an interesting article from Bleacher Report that was talking about the best base runners in Major League Baseball. Now, it's from about a decade ago, so it's a little outdated at this point, but I think at least from a historical perspective, there's not a lot of guys that would have played in the last decade that come to mind that would have supplanted a lot of these guys on this list. Now, I like some aspects on this list because they kind of break it across 4 different categories. Stolen base percentage, which I think makes a lot of sense. One that I'm not as big a fan of here is run scoring percentage, the percentage of the time that a base runner eventually scored a run. Because I feel like while that is somewhat indicative of your base running ability, that's as much based on the offense you're playing in as anything else. If you're a leadoff hitter for a really good team, you're going to score more often than the leadoff hitter for a really bad team because you wouldn't be on a bad team if you scored all the time. Now, I do like the next one, which is extra bases taken percentage, because that's going to show how often they're able to advance more than one base on a single or 2 bases on a double.
That's the Victor Martina versus Kevin Kiermaier's
right.
difference.
And then one which is interesting is the person that wrote this article, Cliff Eastham, he invented kind of his own statistic, double triple percentage, which is the total number of doubles and triples that player hit divided by their total number of hits, which I thought was actually an interesting way because that would show who was a good base runner more often than not, because somebody that ekes out doubles and triples where there wouldn't have normally been them would show up in a statistic like that.
Right.
So he put together this list, and you actually have named a bunch of the guys that were on this list, and you're going to hear them all. And so number 10 is actually a Met. It's Jose Reyes.
Right.
Because for him, he's a guy that 80% stolen base percentage. He took the extra base 50% of the time. And he actually on this list is the highest guy with 24% of his hits being doubles and triples. He was a guy.
that with Reyes also, and you could see it on the field, right? When you watched him run, watching him go first to home was one of the most exciting plays in baseball. We don't see that enough today, by the way.
Mm-hmm. And then, it's interesting. I thought that was just so interesting because the guy that's right behind him, that number 9 or right in front of him at number 9 is another we've talked about, the flying Hawaiian, Shane Victorino. And people, I think, don't remember him being one of the fastest players in the major leagues when he was playing for a while.
Mm-hmm.
And he was pretty much identical stats to Reyes: 79% stolen base percentage, 52% extra base percentage, 23% double triple percentage. So like he is right there in line with him in terms of the statistics. So that would be the kind of discussion then to me came down to which player's base running savviness did you appreciate more? But you're going to have a lot of then we get into two guys that I don't know particularly well. And I'm guessing you're going to be like, I don't know these guys. Well, this guy actually couldn't have been a major leaguer because he only played 9 seasons, and that's Ron LaFleur.
A Hall of Famer, you mean?
Yes, he couldn't have been a Hall of Famer because he only played 9 seasons, but he led the leagues in stolen bases twice and in runs scored. So this guy was a base running threat, even though he didn't actually play that long.
Right. A Tiger, Ron LaFleur, as I recall. And had an interesting background, kind of overcame some stuff to play in the major leagues. Was a good player and had, I guess, a few years. I don't even know statistically, but then,
it's actually impressive considering he had 455 career stolen bases in 9 seasons.
That's more than I would have thought.
He led the league with 97 stolen bases in 1980.
Wow.
He only got caught stealing 19 times. It's pretty good. So then the next guy is somebody I think we have talked about before, but I can't be sure, is Richie Ashburn.
Yeah, Richie Ashburn played for the Phillies, most notably. He's a Hall of Famer, actually.
He is a Hall of Famer. Played 19 seasons.
And an original Met, you may not know. So at the end of his career, he played for the Mets in 62. And Richie Ashburn was, I would have not thought of him at that time as having a lot of stolen bases. So that might be interesting to look at him just in terms of why he was determined to be such a good base runner.
Well, he stole 234 bases in his career, which is not that many.
It was that time, though. Probably at that time, it was a lot.
Yeah, he only got and he was caught stealing 117 times in that period. So he was not but he was a guy that scored all the time. He was somebody that made sure. So he was somebody that took the extra base 53% of the time. So he was somebody that maybe wasn't necessarily stealing the most amount of bases, but he was somebody that was consistently finding ways to stretch out his hits into bigger hits and score because of them.
I really like the extra base, taking the extra base stat, because that goes away from what we normally look at, like you said, in stolen bases. And frankly, if Ashburn were to be rated on his stolen base prowess, it sounded like he was successful about 2/3 of the time, which by today's standards is not good at all.
It's pretty. Yeah. You would not send somebody that was successful as much as unsuccessful as much as he was in this modern day. But then once you kind of get past that, you get into guys that kind of expect to be there, like Tim Raines.
Yeah, right. Right, he was on my list too. But yeah, of course, Tim Raines. Yeah, he's one of the greatest base stealers of all time. And I guess he was a great base runner too.
Yeah, he stole. Tim Raines had 808 steals in his career and only got caught 146 times.
Yeah, that'll work.
That'll work. And he also took the extra base. Let's see here. Tim Raines took the extra base 50% of the time.
I'll let you finish. It makes me think of a question about guys that don't have that many stolen bases, but have these really high extra base percentages.
That would be interesting to look at to see, because that would probably tell you who are the savviest base runners.
Right.
Because they're guys that shouldn't be stretching hits out. And that's what I kind of come back to with like the core thesis is that you can be a good base runner without being particularly fast, but you'll never be a great or an all-time base runner without being fast, just because the guys that are fast can make all those same decisions as you, but they can actually do it more often and have more impact as a result.
Completely. And we see it happen, not just, actually the play we started the podcast with was a fielding mishap more than it was a base running, unless you give Contreras credit for coming all the way around third and scoring from second on a ball that didn't get past the pitcher.
Right. Yeah. which is savvy base running as part of it. But, it is the kind of thing where it's hard to The problem with base running, especially savvy base running, is it's almost impossible to quantify. Like where a error on the fielder's judgment in play leads to the extra base versus the hitter's ability to recognize it. So I think one of the more interesting things also is when you're looking at is there's so many examples of really bad base running and like recent examples. Like I think like literally just yesterday, Gary Sanchez just looked very dumb after he hits he hits the ground ball. Guy throws it to first. Now, what's interesting about this is one, it's Gary Sanchez running, so I can't imagine it was normally going to be a particularly close play at first base, but the guy makes the error, and Sanchez takes a wide turn coming around first. I'm going to go to second, and he has the Little League nightmare where the ball just ricochets right back to the guy. You know, the ball just bounces off the wall, comes straight back to the first baseman, and then he's just dead to rights between first and second at this point. He's got no shot. It was just like, ooh, it's a bit unlucky, but it's also a bit of bad base run. Like I don't know where I rank that in terms of total bad base running. Yeah. Like you have to make the decision to make the turn before you know where the ball is bouncing.
I think a lot of times players can be confused by what they think they saw, and they don't run, the way they would. If you think about one of the plays that I remember from the World Series Mets versus Yankees in 2000, so the Mets brought up a guy in September, Timo Perez, who ended up playing for the team in the World Series. And in game one of the World Series, ball goes, deep to left, and Timo thinks it's a home run, and he thinks he's, can just kind of run around the bases, but it's not. And then he tries to pick up the pace, come around third base, and gets thrown out at home plate in a game that went to extra innings. The Mets lost 4-3.
And if he had just run it hard.
Yep. Had he just run it hard. So that's more, they say it's a bad base running play. Obviously he didn't recognize. So you're supposed to run hard if you're not sure. And he thought he was sure.
Well, what's even more confusing is that he knew the ball was in the air. So he also wasn't tagging. He was just running.
Right. And so, you can make bad plays, bad mental plays. And we talked about on this podcast, one of the greatest baseball player of all time, people would say, Babe Ruth, getting thrown out, trying to steal second for the last out of the 1926 World Series against the Cardinals.
Which by all modern metrics is like the worst thing that you could possibly do is get thrown out at second base to end the game.
Right. And today that would be like, but I guess it was Babe Ruth, and so
right. But like you would
took some heat, I guess.
I wouldn't even send Whit Merrifield to steal second base with 2 outs in the 9th inning of the World Series.
A Cardinal, who was a former Cardinal now, Colton Wong, now with the Brewers in the World Series in 2013, got picked off to end Game 4 of the World Series. That would have to go down as a bad base running play, right?
Yeah, especially because getting picked off is such a rare thing. Like, it's not like something where people regularly get picked off of first base or whatever, like, especially in a postseason game. But to get picked off first base to end a World Series game is just
right. Well, and it gets a little worse when you get into the nitty gritty here, because they were down 4-2. So if you're down 4-3, trying to steal to get that tying run to second base,
like, okay, at least I can understand why you were doing, because you're also probably thinking like, oh man, if this guy hits a deep double, I can score from first. But the only way you tie that game is if the guy at the plate hits the ball out of the park. So you're irrelevant at first base.
Right, and oddly enough, so Koji Uhira was the Red Sox closer at the time, and a lefty, right? As I recall. So again, the whole thing about a lefty having a pickup point. So he was already, had a guy who was, was looking at him when he's standing on the mound. And the Cardinals lost that game, and they lost every other game. They lost the World Series. Not that was the catalyst, but it sure didn't help.
It sure didn't help, because that's the kind of thing where you're just like, you can't help but think in the back of your mind, it's not our year.
So as we do our tour of New York, you may be familiar with A-Rod's glove slap in the ALCS in 2004.
Right, but that's an interesting one where people...
Is that a smart base running play?
I think it's Schrodinger's smart base running play, where it's both the smart base running play and a very dumb one simultaneously. Because like I understood what he was going for. He's not allowed to do that. But like it's a smart baseball play because that was the only way the guy was going to be safe.
Now, not being a big Yankee fan myself, but I was living in Los Angeles when the Yankees were in the World Series in the late '70s, and so Reggie Jackson had the 3 home run game and all that. But what else he did, I believe it was in one of those 2 series, '77, '78, is on a line drive to right field. Reggie Jackson's on first, and he's running, and he sees the ball coming. I guess it's softness, so he kind of turns his hip and lets the ball. I didn't let it hit him because he would have been out. So I'm trying to think what he did is, I don't know if he deked somebody, but he did something that people were really upset about. Now I'm getting the play wrong because obviously had he been hit by the batted ball, he would have been out.
Yeah.
Right.
But you've seen plenty of guys essentially use their body as a screen. Like you see that all the time go from a guy going second to third. He'll screen the shortstop for like a half second and then continue on his way to third. And you see that mess with fielders all the time.
It wasn't a batted ball. It was a throw in the field.
Oh.
And he moved his hip and into the play and hip no way. And it is the 1978 World Series. And so that base running play, they say, swung the 1978 World Series in favor of the Yankees. And that to me was a smart base running play, even though people hated it.
Right, because people hate it, but that's just being smart. Like, I think people, it probably would have been, because the thing is that wasn't like he didn't do necessarily a baseball thing. Sticking out your hip really doesn't require you to do much. It wasn't like he stuck out his hand and tried to like interfere with the ball. I think that would, I think people would perceive it differently. If he had like reached out and tried to like smack the ball out of the air, people wouldn't perceive that the same as sticking your hip out as you're running, because that's the same way as kind of leaning into the pitch.
Now, that helped the Yankees win that World Series. Now, as I find out later, Rule 7.09F says a base runner cannot intentionally interfere with a thrown ball. Did he simply hold his ground or flex his thigh muscle?
Right. And that's what makes it a smart baseball play, is that he knew the rule enough that that's what he could get away with. The same way you're supposed to try and make an effort to get out of a way of a pitched ball, and you have to make the cursory effort to do so. Like, you see the curveball coming in, you kind of just like twist your back to it so it just gets you in the back. You're like, well, I kind of tried to move. Give me first base.
So you made in our 6 greatest plays, Hall of Fame plays podcast, one of the first ones we did, you, I think, led with the flip. Right?
Yes.
So now you've got a player who's running the bases on that flip who contributed to a degree to that play, because what didn't that player do? He didn't slide.
Yes, you're right. He did, because if he had slid, I think Giambi's safe at home.
Right. So is that a bad base running play?
I part of me doesn't want to punish Giambi for not anticipating Jeter making maybe the most heads-up baseball play of all time, because in any other circumstance, that's not an issue, because you're never expecting a guy to come in and redirect the throw at that depth. So he's just assuming he's safe. Now, what does that mean? You're probably teaching all your kids now, just slide every single time.
Right. And we didn't really talk much about this before, but the idea that guys have sliding pads for years when they years ago they didn't. I wonder how much that took away from guys even trying to do things on the bases, because basically when I was a kid learning, they had you slide every time. You never didn't slide. And then over the years that's kind of changed a little bit, and people don't always slide, as evidenced by Giambi on that play.
And it's interesting because people, guys have the sliding glove to protect their hands. But interestingly, I think they've done the studies on it. It's actually faster to slide feet first than head first.
Yeah. And safer, certainly.
Oh, yeah, that's what I mean.
For the player, not so much for the fielder.
No, the fielder's in more danger because you're going feet in instead of hands. But my guess is guys want to go hands in because it allows them to be more targeted, and you can slide away from the bag more because it's easier to reach your hand out than try and like reach your leg out.
But when you do that, and guys, the way that they're running the bases now, and it happened in a Met game this week, both VR and DeGrom got thrown out by coming off the base on either an extra base or it wasn't a steal in DeGrom's camp. It was in Villar, because they popped off the base before they tried to re-grab it as they were sliding at such a velocity that they couldn't stop. And so that seems to be happening more than ever, that the players are keeping the tag on and umpires are calling guys out. And now we go to replay and we can find out, the guy did come off the base, whereas before he would have never been called out.
Right, which I wonder is how much of that is specifically born out of the knowledge that there is to replay. So
100%.
now the fielders know it is worth sticking with that tag because that guy might pop up. And I bet it would be the kind of thing where if guys have been doing it the past 40 years and holding the tag and we had replay, there would have been a whole lot of guys that got thrown out, after they went back to the replay because they just never bothered checking for it.
Right. So I want to talk about another play, and you know this from playing baseball. It's called a deke. Right. So you did a lot of deking as a pitcher, trying to pick guys off and having, I think you guys said you had like 15 pickoff plays. The point is that baseball is one of the few sports, right, where trying to fake out the guy by making believe the throw is coming to you to get a guy, to do something. So in the World Series in 91, the famous Jack Morris World Series, where you pitched a 1-0 Game 7, Lonnie Smith, really good ball player, played for a whole lot of teams, got deked basically on a ball laced to left center field, and he was going to come home from first base to break this scoreless tie, except he loses track of the ball and is faked out by the middle infielders, Knobloch and Greg Gangy, who feigned turning a double play. He stops running to locate the ball and was unable to score, and the Twins win the series clincher Game 7.
That reminds me of the brilliant Ichiro play from a couple of years ago. So Ichiro was playing, I want to say, for either the Marlins against the Giants or for the Giants. I'm pretty sure it's for the Marlins in McCovey Park. Or in their
AT&T or whatever it was called then. Yeah.
So he's playing right field. The guy is on second base. Batter's up. Batter hits an absolute bomb to right center field. Ichiro just kind of casually drifts back like he's catching a routine fly ball, and at the last second turns around and fields the ball off the wall. And he completely fools the base runner into thinking he's about to make the catch. So the guy can only go from second to third instead of scoring like he normally would have been able to, because Ichiro just acted like he was fielding a routine fly ball up until the very last moment and completely dekes the runner.
Right.
So that was an end.
Runners can be fooled is what you're saying, and it happens a lot.
Oh, totally. Like when I was a kid, now the thing is you see a lot more pickoff plays at a younger level because they're going to work more often. Guys are like, I remember we had a ton of different pickoff plays where like the shortstop would flash in and then the second baseman, then you like, as he backs out, the second baseman would come in and you throw, because kids were just basically like, oh, the first guy moved, I can now extend my lead. And then you catch them when their body weight shift in the other direction. As you get older, you just don't do that stuff. And interestingly, what I do remember is all of our pickoff plays were based around pickoff plays at second base, which you almost never see at the major league level. Guys never throw to second base. I don't know what the exact reasoning is for it. I think because making a mistake throwing the ball to second base is a lot more punishing than making a mistake throwing the ball to first. Like if you throw the ball by the first baseman, he's probably getting to second, maybe to third. If you throw the ball past the guy at second base, depending on where your center fielder is, especially with the shift also impacts your ability to do this. But you might be throwing the ball into the outfield and that guy is scoring.
And the amateur level, you'll see this happen a lot more often than you would at any professional level.
Yeah. And then third base, nobody really, like, you would actually have more designed catcher throws at the low level, level I was playing at, compared to actual pickoff attempts at third base. Nobody threw to third base because, again, you make a mistake going to third, the guy scores guaranteed.
And it makes me think also of at the amateur levels versus the pro level. Even there, the hidden ball trick, which should never work, but when you watch it sometimes, I notice that players, even at the major league level, don't always watch the ball go back to the pitcher as they're dusting themselves off after a pickoff throw. And I'm thinking,
because it's just,
who's watching? I hope the first base coach is watching and saying, don't go anywhere, stay on the base. He hasn't thrown the ball back yet. But you'd think it would work more often because there's all kinds of fakes you could run.
I think the thing with the hidden ball trick is the hidden ball trick essentially it's unsporting from the degree of it works off of disrupting the accepted flow of the baseball game. The only really way the hidden ball trick works is that you're playing a 162 game season, and in game 134, you're not thinking about the guy playing the hidden ball trick. So you just get up off the bag and go back because you're really going to run the hidden ball trick on me. kind of deal almost. Like guys
Yeah.
don't expect it. So it's like, I think that's the kind of thing where it's like the hidden ball trick is probably one of the more memorable baseball plays because it's something that exists entirely outside the scope of the rest of the game.
You know, if
It's
you
like
can
the only
swing,
play in baseball that's like it.
if you can swing on a 3-0 pitch, I'm sorry, you can run the hidden ball trick.
Oh, I am totally in favor of running the hidden ball trick. But one, I think when it doesn't work, you look really dumb.
Right. And when you think about, this season in the major leagues, there's a run scoring, issue, right? We're not having a lot of runs comparatively. Batting averages are lower. You would think that would heighten the importance of base running.
I think you're right. I think you're going to see an increase in people's. I wouldn't be surprised if there's some team that goes like, okay, I don't think this hitting thing is going away this year. Like, I don't think suddenly major league hitters in the month of June are going to be like, oh yeah, we sucked the first 2 months of the season and hit like a collective like 230 something, but now we're going to turn it into 280 hitters collectively the rest of the year so we can raise that. I think this is here to stay this year until they change the balls. So I think there's going to be some team that's like, okay, we're going to like 2002 Angels this. We're going to go first to third. We're going to steal a lot of bases because manufacturing runs will become more important, especially in the postseason, because guys aren't hitting the baseball with the same authority that they used to do.
And that all plays into what we talk about with the shift, right? Why we don't believe that the shift should be eliminated. And we're already seeing, evidence this season of guys starting to hit the ball into those holes and taking advantage of those situations. And that's all going to play into the same thing.
And that's going to be the response that guys are going to be like, okay, you know what? The 3 true outcome stuff isn't necessarily worth it when I could get a hit and extend my team's inning because they're just giving me a base hit. Like,
and
these guys are good. These guys are good enough that if Michael Conforto wants to, he could just hit that ball through that third base hole a lot of the time. And the problem is that when is it right to give up on your at bat in order to do that when you could potentially hit a home run? So, he sends you a pitch where you could try and knock it through that hole, and you probably could, or you could try and drive the ball and hit a double. What are guys going to do a lot of the time? I think they're going to try and hit that double, but I think you're going to see more and more guys just taking that single and being like, you know what, keep this train rolling.
One of the big things that I think I hear from older players that aren't playing anymore that look back and say the big changes in baseball are with 2 strikes. You don't see players shorten up or try to hit the ball. They actually take the same swing a lot of times with 2 strikes that they take with 0 and 1 strike. And that is certainly a big change that you don't talk about too much in baseball.
Part of that, I think, is that you have more pitchers that can throw whatever pitch they want on whatever count they want. So you have guys now that are like, look, if I try and shorten up my swing, you're facing Jacob deGrom. It's like, okay, well, he's going to throw 102 or he's going to throw like a nasty 91 mile an hour slider, and shorten up doesn't do anything against that. So rather than alter your swing, it's probably better to just keep swinging like you consistently do to try and maintain that like level that you're consistently at, rather than being like, okay, I'm going to just shorten up and try and make contact.
Do you think that, so baseball came to this season after a pandemic season, and I think everybody's still adjusting to playing a full season. Guys are getting hurt all over the place. We've seen all this. You can't really transition to be a better base running team within the season. Is it something you should have done in spring training, or it be sort of at an organizational level?
It has to be at an organizational level because you have to value players and get players that can take advantage of good base running. Because you could have a guy that's a really smart, savvy base runner on your team, but if he's slow as molasses, it doesn't matter. Like if he doesn't get that many opportunities to take the extra base or score when he shouldn't, how valuable is that guy's good base running? You need to, and that's what I think you had like with the 2015, 2016 Royals. They looked at their team and said, we're not going to compete by signing the biggest and strongest hitters that hit a ton of home runs. We need to get guys that can do all of those little things organizationally and make an organizational and a team effort to be aligned around those principles. So I think pivoting within a season is probably pretty hard, but over the course of a year or two, you could probably make enough changes to be like, okay, we're going to go for this style now.
my impression is, and I don't know if you agree with this, is that when you get to the playoffs, sort of like in hockey, right? You can play a wide open style all season in hockey, and then in the playoffs, hockey games are much tighter. They're defensive. Every shift matters. In baseball, in the playoffs, you see more evidence. Do you think of? And I think yes. Of the little things that make baseball really great. It's more because everything is heightened.
Well, everything is heightened. You're also only playing with the best teams, which means generally only the best pitchers are in the game. So immediately that put runs at a premium, which means manufacturing runs becomes much more valuable because you're not gonna face Joey Lucchese in a playoff game. You're gonna get 3 or 4 starters that are all really good. You're only going to see their best relievers. And the teams that have made it there, you don't see a lot of offensive juggernaut teams make the postseason and make a deep run.
Well, and the Yankees, strike me as one of those teams, right? They're just a power team. We'll just club you to death. And the Twins, the Twins have played bad this year, right? And they were a home running hitting team, and it's not so much home runs this year, and that could be one of the reasons why they're not. Their pitching has been terrible, actually. It's the real reason.
Yeah, but you look at like the Dodgers who won the World Series. Like they were a team that hit a lot of home runs, but they also did all the little things well.
Yeah, in the World Series, I don't think of them as a home run hitting team.
Right. You don't remember teams winning the World Series by clubbing their opponent to death.
It does not happen that much.
It's not because games are too tight. Pitchers, the moment pitchers start not having it, they get replaced. They're not left out there to dry as much.
And it's hard to change your style in midseason, right? If you've been a clubbing team and all of a sudden you're in the playoffs and you got to, do all the little things, hit behind the runner and scratch out runs and take the extra base, it isn't easy necessarily to make that transition in base running.
Especially if it's like all season you've been trying to hit the ball over the fence when that guy gets on first base. It's a 5th inning, 1 out guy gets on first. And instead of being like, how do we manufacture a run here, even though we have an out, you're probably still hit a home run. And that's where it kind of comes back to like having guys that are smart base runners. They steal you runs in a season, and those guys will steal you runs in postseason games because they're able to see that ball's going to fall in the gap. I'm going to get an extra base out of this, or he's not going to get there, and I know that guy has a weak arm. I'm going to score from second here when I normally shouldn't, and that's the key of being a great base runner, and that's where like the contribution really comes from. And it's sort of, even though it's a somewhat unchanged part of the game that still affects it on such a big level, and I just think that's really interesting.
Yeah, I like the idea. I'll close with this, and you can wrap it. So one of our favorite players right now, everybody's favorite player, is Shohei Ohtani, who, in addition to clubbing home runs and pitching great, also has 7 stolen bases this season. He has a chance to break the all-time record for stolen bases in a season with a pitcher. And I think that's amazing that,
he is that capable a player. He's able to do it. And then, so just to kind of finish off the rest of that list, top 5 was Ricky Henderson.
Yeah, he would be number 1 on my list every time.
The only reason he wasn't number 1 is because he led the league getting caught in steals 5 different times. So he got caught stealing a lot.
But he also has the most stolen bases.
Bases of all time, yeah. And then the rest of this list was Jimmy Rollins, Kenny Lofton, Willie Mays, and Willie Wilson.
All base steals. Interesting. Mays probably would be the guy with the fewest stolen bases, I would think, on average, of all of those guys.
But he took the extra base the highest percentage of the time. Right. 63% of the time, he took the extra base.
Yeah. That's the time when that probably didn't, happen as much. The amount of speed he had and the ability he had to make the right play was remarkable when he came up in the 50s.
Right, and that was something that he changed. And then you have and then Willie Wilson. What really set him apart was his excellence in everything. He had an amazing stolen base percentage at 83%, but he also took the extra base 53% of the time. So the guy literally was a walking double.
Yeah, he scored a lot of runs.
And that puts a lot of pressure on a team. And I think that's something that teams, I think if a team can somehow, they have the parts already and they just kind of shift their focus, that could be a dark horse team that emerges in a season like this.
We'll wait and see.
Thanks for listening. Subscribe to our podcast on your favorite platform. And you can follow us on Twitter at AlmostCoop.